Well, hello students, how are you all? I hope you have learned friction from our previous videos. Today we will talk about the dependency of friction. What is that? Let's move on to the block diagram. As you can see in your book that there is also a block, but we will draw another block in 2D over here. That as you can see, a block is there. So we know that if we just started to push the block from one side, then what happened? This will move forward. So in our last class, we discussed that if we move it forward, then always in opposite direction along the contact plane, the friction force will occur. Alright. So this is the idea about the block diagram of friction force. Now see, this is not always happen that we can push a body very easily. Suppose a big stone is there. You can push it or not. Just think about that. A big stone is there. So the weight of the stone is very high. So a normal person cannot push it and move it forward. So why this is happening? Cause due to friction. Okay. But if this kind of box is given, you are pushing it forward, which is quite reasonable. But the block is also having some friction. So I gave you two ideas. A big stone is there, and you are so tiny in front of that. So you are trying to push it and move it forward, but you can't. But in this case, you are pushing that body, but in both cases, you are having friction. And due to these both cases, the frictions are different. And for the first one, that the block is moving forward, we say that the kinetic friction, you must write it in your copy, that the kinetic friction is working when the block is moving forward against the surface. Alright. But in this case, when the stone is not moving forward, the friction is called static friction. So we got two frictions, that is kinetic friction and static friction. If someone asks that how you can differentiate these two differently, then you can say that when the body is moving forward but having some friction, that is known as kinetic friction. Please write it down. When the body is moving forward but having some friction, then the friction known as kinetic friction. Coming to static friction, you will say, while the body is not moving further due to friction, while the body is not moving further due to friction, that is called static friction. Remember that. You must write this two definition in your copy. Alright, so we got the idea about the type of friction. There are also so many other type of friction. We will discuss about that later, but now we will talk about the dependency of friction. There are two dependency of friction. First, weight of the body, weight of body. Second, the surface area touching the surface. So I will write it as surface area. Let me hide this one first. After that, I will explain. Okay. So as you can see in our previous examples, I told you this is quite pushable. You can push it and it will move forward. But for the stone, it is not possible. Why? Because the stone is very heavier. That means the weight of the body is very high. So when weight of the body is very high, friction will also increase. Remember that. You will write it like this. When the weight of the body is very high, the friction will also increase. Write it in your copy as word, as I said over here. Alright. In next part, obviously the opposite one. When the lighter body is there, it's very easy to push. Suppose I give you a ball, you can kick it very well or you can roll it. So it will move forward very easily by having some force. But in this kind of stone, as it is quite heavier and quite larger, we can't push it to move forward. So that's it about the weight of the body, and that is how the frequency depending upon the weight of the body. Now coming to the surface area. Remember, if a body is very small in the surface, so how much you touching the surface, the friction is depending upon that, because the friction is only generates in this surface, that touching the surface. So I gave you two body over here. See, this is number one and this is number two. As you can see, this is smaller body, this is quite larger body. But that is not our issue. Our issue is that the surface area. In first case, the surface area touching the ground is very less. While in second case, the surface area touching the ground is quite more than the previous. So you can see that while the surface area touching the ground is increases, that means if A increases, the friction force will also increase. This is proportional sign, those who don't know this one, but you can write it in word that if A is increased, then the friction A, no, sorry, it's not A, write it down. If the area is increased, then the friction force will also increases. So that is all about the dependency of the friction force. Now we will move on to the types of friction force. While I already told you there are two types of friction force, which are static friction, and I also gave you the definition of that. Those who missed that, please just start the video from the previous part and just write it down while I'm saying that. So this is the static friction and kinetic friction that we already discussed about. Now coming to sliding friction and rolling friction. How this will happen? When a body will slide down. Maybe it can slide off the park, or maybe it can be some inclined plane from where you are sliding down. So I placed a body at the top of some inclined plane. So what will happen? It will slide down at the bottom. And for this, it will experience some force along the contact point opposite to the direction of rolling, sorry, opposite to the direction of moving. So what you got? If the body is moving in this direction, which is pretty obvious, it will come to the bottom, then the friction force is working opposite direction and along the contact surface. So just remember that, and this is known as sliding friction. So how we will write the sliding friction? When the body is sliding down from an inclined plane, then we can say the working friction is known as sliding friction. You can write this one. Alright. Now coming to second or the last one, that is the rolling friction. How and why it is occurred? Suppose in the place of object, if you placed a wheel, if you placed a wheel over there, it will come down also, but it will roll down. We should say it will roll down. So this is also happening due to friction working in the opposite direction in the contact point. So in this case, we will say that this friction is known as rolling friction. So that is all about the dependency of friction and the types of friction. So thank you all and keep learning.